You're listening to the E2C Network, podcast by Auburn fans for Auburn fans. Where you go, Auburn family, and welcome back to Inside the Jungle, your source for Auburn men's basketball analysis and discussion here on the E2C Network. We're back again in a postseason, preseason, whatever you want to call it. We're not in season basketball episode where we're breaking down what's been going on with the program and around the program since the end of the 2020-21 season. So many 20s here, so little time. We're going to be talking today about obviously big piece of news that has been a few days past. We're a little late getting around to this, but we felt like we needed to sit down and talk about it. Some departures, some entries into the program, and potential that may be coming in the future. So basically, it's just a whole bunch of roster discussion. To do all that, I brought in my friend and co-host, Mr. Gray Oldenburg. Gray, welcome back.
I continue to come back. Thanks for having me, Kyle. For
now, you do until I get rid of you. I mean, no, that's it. I love having you here, and I think a lot of people who were listening to this the beginning of the season when I was doing the solo shows are probably like, thank God he got somebody else in there. That he has somebody to actually talk to and not just himself. But anyway, obviously we cannot get any further into this episode without talking about the big news. It was the big question on everyone's mind the day he arrived on campus was, when is Sharife Cooper going to leave? We all knew probably that he would be declaring. It was like a 99.9% chance. The question was, would he declare and then rule himself ineligible because of taking an agent? Well, unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you want to look at it, he has made the decision to declare for this next draft, but also to no longer use his eligibility. He will sign with an agent, and he will no longer be a part of the basketball program, albeit on good terms, but it's still sad and happy for him. Mix of emotions. So your initial reactions to the news that Sharife Cooper is no longer part of the team?
I wasn't surprised. He got his grade back. Obviously, he went and talked to a lot of insiders, maybe some agents, maybe some scouts and coaches around the league, and we saw his draft stock, plummet so high at the beginning once he stepped on the floor and played those 12 games, and they got injured, and we kind of start to drop, and then we were like, oh, maybe he comes back to jump higher in the draft. But we saw him steady around 16 to 20 range in the draft overall wise, and I think it's the right decision for him.
I went back and forth on whether it's the right decision, and only he knows, only his family knows, and only his coaches know what's the right decision for him. Really, honestly, just him. But those people should, and I'm sure had more influence than any of us sitting here behind a microphone will ever have on a college basketball player's decision of what they're going to do with their future. So I do trust that he got the best information possible. Kind of, I guess, as a side note to that, and I would ask you, do you find any concern for the program with his departure and decision not to come back? What I mean by that is there are some people out there who are always worried that the NCAA is still out to get Bruce, and because of the Chuck Person stuff, the suspension of postseason play this year that we chose to implement on ourselves. Do you think the decision is a reflection on that?
No, I don't think it had anything to do with that, because you can kind of throw that on Isaac last year or Chuma the year before. I don't think that had anything to do with the program violations or stuff that's happened in the past or stuff that could happen in the future, even though I think we're past the NCAA problems, even though they are always out to get Bruce Pearl. But no, I think this was a decision made within Cooper and Cooper's family and Cooper's coaches and friends.
Yeah, I do think that it's not something people should be worried about. Obviously, that's the fun of speculating and talking around the water cooler. It's like, oh, well, what do you think this means? And when you have a player of his magnitude come into your program and then leave so quickly, it leaves a void, because we're not used to having this type of player be part of the program. And I'm nothing to take away from Okoro and Chuma Okeke and many others that have come before them. But, Sharife was kind of like that stamp of Bruce Pearl consistently bringing in these guys, because Chuma, while he was a great player, there were a lot of teams that passed up on him. Yeah. I would think Isaac Okoro maybe not so much that case, but Sharife was somebody that everybody wanted. I mean, it made headlines on ESPN when he chose to come to Auburn because that's how good of a point guard he is. So I understand fans' lamentations, if I may use a big word, of why we're freaking out about this so much. What I'm surprised of, and I don't know if you feel the same way, is how much people have just been like distressing about him leaving. Have you gotten an impression about that amongst the fan base?
Yeah. I mean, I understand that because that's a prospect that we probably he would have been great next year, and him leaving does kind of leave a void because we only had him for 12 games, especially since the eligibility and this injury. But I also think this is really good for this basketball program, especially with the prior two in Chuma and Isaac. This will now be probably 3 straight top 20 picks in the NBA draft. You never heard of that from Auburn ever before. This just shows that this program is on the upward spiral here and not on the downward spiral.
See, this is the type of thing that Kentucky fans don't freak out about. They're like, oh, there goes another one.
Like, oh, yeah, we knew that was coming.
So they just know just to only get excited for one year with each of their players that come in. Despite this year, we're going to continue to remind them of how terrible they were this year, although we weren't that much better than them. Speaking of which, it's always interesting to me. No one is going to sit here and deny the greatness of Sharife Cooper, not even me. But I will just kind of, take a step back. I always like to play devil's advocate. We honestly weren't that much better record-wise with him as opposed to without him. I mean, we did win more proportionally when you looked at it with versus without him. But it's not like Sharife Cooper came in and made a humongous difference in the record column stats, the way we compete, the competitive nature with Red. Yes. But, do you think that's a fair statement to say, or am I kind of stepping out of bounds by inferring that?
No, that is a fair statement, but I also don't think one player should have that big impact on a team's record like that. For example, it's the same way in football or in baseball. A hitter or a wide receiver is not going to make a difference in you winning and losing the game. Mm-hmm. But it's the same way in basketball. Even though the point guard and somebody of a point guard like that status is the most important player, but he's not gonna come in and you're automatically going to win more games with him.
Yeah. I think what you saw with Sharife is he made us more versatile so that when the problems arose, they didn't become as glaring. And you could see that before while he was there. And then after, it became really evident how much he did add to the team and how much of a facilitator it was. You watch it go from a micro to a macro level, how Dylan Cardwell, perfect example. Guy was, to be fair, mostly irrelevant in terms of stats, not in terms of contribution, things like that, but stats until Sharife Cooper got there. And in fairness, they had a connection previously, played together previously. Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. But I think that's a great small scale analogy for what Sharife Cooper does for this team on a macro level, what he does in making everybody better individually. And I think that's something that's going to serve him well at the next level because he's the smaller guard. He's the smaller point guard. So he's going to need to be able to show, hey, yeah, I can score. I can produce myself, but look what I do to the rest of the team. Mm-hmm. That is his selling point as a point guard to me. So I really do think that he's got a bright future going ahead for him. So what do you think was if you could pinpoint one reason why he chose to go and not stay, what do you think that is?
I think it was his grade coming back. That's something that we have to wait and see about JT Thor. He's got to go get that grade, get your status of where you would be in this draft class or in the draft coming up. So I think when he went and saw that, okay, I'm not really, my drop wasn't as far as I thought it was, or, I'm not dropping in the second round. I'm still about 16 to 20. I'm going to go to a team that doesn't necessarily need me to produce immediately, but can develop me and I can play with some guys that I can make even better. I think that's a selling point right there.
I lean more in this category, and I have a lot of people that disagree with me, but I tend to think of things long-term and kind of that process, look beyond just the now type of situation. I wonder how much he didn't look ahead to the next crop of guards and point guards that would be going to the draft next year and say, can I really make the jump for where my grade is now even higher with who's going to be here? And, I think there's nobody in the college basketball world that would argue that he wouldn't be a top 5 point guard coming back next year, hands down. But could he rise further up in the draft class if he performed at the same level? I wonder if, his decision wasn't so much about the grade this year as opposed to what his prospects were going to be and what he was going to be competing against next year. It could have been honestly, we're pinpointing one thing down here. So it's a likelihood that this is a multifaceted decision. But I think yours is one that a lot of people will think about. So the impact, though, of Sharife Cooper has been felt here in very short of time. Yeah. Where do you put Sharife Cooper? Because we've got a weird situation here where he's only here for maybe 2/3, if that, of a season, but yet we recognize how great he was. Like, how do you as a fan, when people have those type of conversations, place him in comparison to other people? Like, how does that work for you?
Yeah, well, that's hard to do. Just because he played just 12 games. If he played this entire year and we made a run in the SEC tournament and the NCAA tournament, it'd be easier because you can then relate him to guys like Kareem Canty and Javon McCormick. You couldn't really relate him to a guy like Jared Harper, but you could look at those guys that were the guy for 1 year and was great for that 1 year. But it's really hard to do that because he only played 12 games. And, it's kind of a weird situation with COVID and his eligibility and his injury and other injuries surrounded the Auburn team and the postseason ban. So when we look back on it, say in a few years, I think we'll look back and still remember how great he was in those 12 games. But it's going to be hard to really compare him to the other guards that have come through this great program.
But you know what I love to do with my co-hosts? I love to make y'all speculate and predict things. Let's extrapolate this out. Remind me, what Jared Harper was here for 2 or 3 seasons? Three. Okay, it flew by so fast. It felt like 2. For 3 seasons, let's extrapolate out and say by some miracle that we were able to retain him for 3 full years. Do you think Sharife Cooper would have been better than Jared Harper based off of how Jared produced and then potentially how Sharife would have done?
Yes.
Why? What's the difference between Sharife Cooper and a Jared Harper?
I think he would have been a better individual player.
Okay.
He's got more NBA talent and he's more ready. He was more ready to come immediately as a freshman than Jared was. I think Jared, his junior year, was one of the best players this program has ever seen.
Right.
And it's hard to relate that because I think if Cooper played this full season out, played next full season out, and that his junior year, I think he could be one of the best this program's ever seen, but we won't see that.
Yeah. I mean, it's obvious if you just look at rankings and stuff like that in terms of what other coaches were thinking when they were recruiting him or not recruiting him. He was looked over. That was kind of the biggest storyline for him during the Final Four run is how much he was looked over, and look at what he's doing now. Sharife Cooper did start from technically a higher position wise in terms of where he would begin his career. So you could just look at that, extrapolate that out, and you would probably say that Sharife, with the same amount of time, maybe ends up a little bit ahead of Jared Harper. But, Jared, we're not going to take anything away from him. I mean, we all know how crucial he was to this program during that time. And what he did, sometimes it's hard to make these type of comparisons because it takes more than just that single person. It takes a coalescing of everyone and everything that is a part of that during that single moment in time. And I think Jared Harper was one of those people that was meant to come around at just the right time. And wow, what a marriage it was. So the comparisons sometimes aren't fun and right to make, but they, it's interesting always to have the speculation. Last little bit of prediction I'd like to do before we not necessarily close the door on Sharife Cooper, but his time as an Auburn Tiger. I'm sure break this down when it happens. But where does he go in the draft for you?
I'd say between 16 and 18. I think people are projecting him around early 20s right now. I think that will rise a little. But, again, just like with Chuma's sake, all it takes is one team to say, hey, we don't need you right now. We don't need you to really come in and make an impact right now, but we want you. We want you for the future. We think you have a future at this organization, and we're going to take you wherever they are. I'd say between 16 and 18 right now, just depending on where each team drafts.
Absolutely. I think that's a great a way to think about this, because this is very much a Chuma situation as opposed to it is a Isaac Okoro. Isaac was expected to come in and produce, and he is, if you're not paying attention to it. Chuma, everybody knew that he would have produced if he hadn't been injured at the end of the season, but thankfully there was someone willing to take a chance on him, and that's paying dividends for him and the Orlando Magic now as well. Not that, Sharife, I'm sure his injury is going to be fine by the time it's right, he's ready to play. But I do think that is something where he can take a little bit of time, work his way into their roster, and show that continue to show, I produce more for my teammates than I do myself. And I think that's going to be his most valuable asset for the NBA coming up very soon. Even though, never mind, I was going to get on a soapbox about the NBA, but I won't do it here. I won't do that and get people stirred up.
Hey, Auburn fans, I want to take a quick timeout from this episode to bring your attention to something very special. Here at the E2C Network, we pride ourselves on bringing you the best content for Auburn fans out there. And best of all, it's free to you. But just because it's free doesn't mean there aren't costs, especially when you have a library of hundreds of podcasts, videos, blogs, and more. Many of you have reached out and asked how you can support this network in the past. Well, now I have your answer. It's called the E2C Network Booster Club over at patreon.com/E2C Network. There you'll find a membership monthly reward system where you can sign up for as little as $1 and get different perks at different tiers. Some of those perks include things such as apparel, eligibility to join us on future podcasts, recognition as an E2C Network booster, exclusive communications, and bonus content that is available nowhere else. If you love this network and want to help us keep producing podcasts like this one, please head on over to patreon.com/E2C Network to join the E2C Network Booster Club. You can also get there by going to our website, e2cnetwork.com/support. Whether you decide to join or not, we are still so appreciative that you would support us by just listening and being here, because each and every one of you is part of our E2C Network family. Well, that's it. Timeout's over. Let's get back into the episode.
Let's talk a little bit about the implications after this. Obviously, that empties out the guard positions, and it makes a lot of other things dominoes fall. We thought we might be getting a lot more of that in this past week since the news broke. But there's been a little bit starting to build. And let me preface all this that we're about to talk about. You're probably hearing this, and the news is already broke about some more stuff that we're going to talk about.
Right as you release this, we're going to get some big commitment or something.
I always say it. Yeah. Like I always say that on the YouTube live streams that we do, that just let me go live and some big news will happen for Auburn. It never fails, because I make the topic, here's what we're going to talk about, and then this other big thing happens. So that's just the way it rolls. Before we talk about who has already signed up to potentially fill a need at guard, let's talk about somebody else who's left and some interesting, maybe not feelings we have. No, Justin Powell, who surprised everyone and left Auburn in the dust, decided to transfer to Tennessee. Your thoughts, your reactions.
That's ridiculous. I'm sorry. That's absurd. No. I don't. Maybe one day we'll maybe get the answer to why Tennessee, because you can make an argument that Kentucky or Eastern Kentucky or Louisville, that's
Western Kentucky,
any of those closer to home. Well, Tennessee's not that much farther than Auburn. But why? Also, what has happened the last 6 times Bruce Pearl has faced Tennessee?
Yep.
I don't expect this to change.
He could have gone a lot of places. Obviously, Alabama would have gotten much more of an uproar than this. But I mean, I didn't even know the news had broke, but feel a collective just like, what the, on social media, just across the Southeast when this happened. I honestly, and maybe, I don't know, do you agree with me? If he had chose to go Kentucky, would you be less outraged?
Yeah, because then you could kind of answer the question why, and it's like to get closer to home because
And to be part of
did
Kentucky.
have a bad injury.
Yeah.
And it's Kentucky. It's not 0-6 versus Bruce Pearl the past 6 times.
So
or can't win an NCAA game. Sorry.
Here's the thing, before you start making some real enemies with Tennessee fans. Not that we really care here. So, I mean, y'all have the grossest color of orange ever. Anyway, it's not that the Tennessee and Auburn rivalry needed a little bit of a supercharge because it was already kind of there. And I will say that, and I think we even talked about this after the Tennessee game, that we still get really excited for it, but it's almost kind of lost a little bit of the emotional punch that it had because A, we're dominating them. B, yes. Bruce Pearl's been at Auburn and away from them for even longer now as a whole. So, that kind of story has lost a little bit of its punch. Well, you got a little bit of something now. I have never not never, I shouldn't say that. In a long time, I have not seen an Auburn athlete go from beloved, like would have just fallen on the sword for him, to public enemy number one.
Yes.
Justin, man. I mean, and he's almost an adult. He can do whatever he wants, but my gosh, son, you could have picked anybody other than Alabama and been okay. But you picked Tennessee? What? Anyway, so
at least Alabama's on the upward slope. Tennessee's not.
That's up for debate too, but we won't start that shenanigans here. How's that Sweet 16 loss feel?
Oh, okay.
Feels so good.
Okay. I didn't say it.
Oh, I said it. Anyway. Oh, by the way, I do want to, as we're having fun with them, and I think this would be appropriate for us to say, obviously the Alabama fan base lost a humongous member of their, team, not team, but the student. And I just, obviously, this rivalry is intense. It is heated and deservedly so, and it should never change. But I think we've all oftentimes shown the ability to come together in moments of crisis, and this would be one of those. Luke Mitchell, do I have his name right? Ratliff, excuse me. Luke Ratliff, Fluffopotamus, as he was called, unfortunately passed away recently, suddenly. And our heart goes out to, obviously, most importantly, his family, but to the Alabama fan base, the basketball fans, all that stuff, because that is not something that anybody wants to do. It's a quick, awkward transition there, but I did want to make sure we gave our condolences out there because the rivalry is important, but some things are much more important than a rivalry. Yes. All right. Awkward transition back to what we were talking about. Justin Powell, bro, what are you doing? So that'll be interesting when we get to see him again next season. Hopefully we get
Auburn Arena when he comes to Auburn.
Oh, you thought goodness. Marshall Henderson had a whoa. So we'll have to probably get tickets for that one. That's going to be a lot of fun. All right, we spent way too much time on that. Let's talk really quickly about somebody who has already arrived to fill the void. That'd be Wendell Green Jr. from Eastern Kentucky, one of the teams that Justin Powell should have gone to. We have decided to bring him in. It was, I guess I didn't hear a lot of hype about this guy. I mean, I heard his name mentioned, but what do you take away? What's your initial reactions to him coming in as a guard option for Auburn?
I'm excited. I'm really excited. He averaged like 15 and 6 his freshman year last year. He played, blanking on the name of the high school, but they've won like 4 straight national championships in the high school. And he was great in high school, and he committed to Eastern Kentucky his freshman year. He was fantastic. He's a quick little, guard that can shoot from the outside, but can facilitate really well. And, Bruce has his type of point guards, as we've seen, with Jared and Kareem and Sharife and Javon and even Davion. But, you see that potential there. And the big thing with this commitment of Wendell Green Jr., he's got not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 years eligibility left.
That looks really nice. The question is this the guy that's going to just explode and leave us early, high and dry again? I mean, we're all so like raw from this whole Justin Powell and Sharife Cooper, and who else have we lost at this point? Javon Franklin, Jamal Johnson. By the way, Jamal Johnson is at UAB. I don't know that we covered this last time.
Yeah.
And then,
great there.
Oh yes, yeah. I think we did talk about it, but Javon Franklin recently went to South Alabama. Very, very happy for him. I think he's going to flourish there as well.
Yeah.
So nice to see Auburn spreading the love literally, Auburn's taking over the state of Alabama. Y'all can have your little Sweet 16 run and make yourself feel better. See, we're back very quickly to giving them trouble. But I think, I don't know enough about Wendell to get over the moon excited. I'm just glad that we, as quickly as Sharife left, bounce back, have somebody come in to fill a void. Now, he's not going to be a point guard, right? He's going to be a combo guard.
Yeah, I think so. I think he's going to be more like a turbo, like a little combo guard. He can, if we need him at point guard, he's a better option than Alan Flanagan at point guard, but, he'll be more of that off guard.
And that's not a knock on Alan Flanagan. It's just that Alan Flanagan is best at a two position.
Yeah.
It's just he did great for what he had to work with at time. And when we took a little bit of that responsibility away from him, it made it even better. But some players are just best suited for certain roles, and that's the case for Alan Flanagan. So yes, I agree with you. I think the biggest thing for him, for Auburn, is the depth. For what he does for opening up other opportunities for other players is going to be a big thing. The other thing that we need to talk about here before we get out is who potentially else could be coming. And there's some other guard options, but there are some non-guard options as too. Last episode, we talked a little bit on this topic. We brought up the discussion point of Walker Kessler, which you and I both completely dismissed. I mean, yeah. I think we probably made people unhappy with how dismissive we were of it. Where do you sit now on the potential of Walker Kessler leaving UNC and coming here?
When we recorded that last one, there was no chance. Literally zero. Like, I couldn't even say 1%. Now, it's between us and him going back to North Carolina.
And so Roy Williams leaving and deciding to retire was the thing that's made this an opportunity.
I think so. I think it's less about Roy Williams leaving and more about Hubert Davis coming in as the head coach. Because I think Walker's a big Hubert guy, and they had a phone call or whatever, and they, apparently they're on good terms, and this is between Auburn and North Carolina. And I didn't think there was any way Auburn had any chance to go get Walker Kessler. I don't even think, especially if JT Thor comes back, I don't think there's a huge need for a guy like Walker Kessler. But if you can get a guy like Walker Kessler,
why not?
Can you get him?
Yeah, I'm not going to say no to that whatsoever. And I'll have to admit to a few people on our YouTube live streams that I was wrong if that happens. So anytime there's rumors like this, I usually always lean on the side of it not happening. So I'm pleasantly surprised and not super disappointed when it doesn't. So that'll be the thing here for me is I'll be happy to admit I was wrong that Walker Kessler comes to Auburn if he were to decide to do so. So it'd be a nice little surprise addition, would take a little bit of the sting away from losing Sharife Cooper, from maybe losing to JT Thor. Who knows? At this rate, we've been dropping people like flies. Just can't keep them. The NBA keeps snatching them up, or other teams keep snatching them up, like Tennessee. But that makes sense. I'm sorry, I had to get you stirred up again. All right, these other players, I just want to get some quick impressions from you on likelihood. Do you think it's going to happen, or who would you want to see? Xavier Pinson out of Missouri, Ty Washington, and then a reclassification of Scoot Henderson. Your just thoughts about those three? Yeah,
I think any of those three would be fantastic, especially with the addition of Wendell Green Jr. But I think if you can go get two of those three, then you're set, especially if you get a guy like Thor back. But the whole thing about Xavier Pinson is not, he's not the missing piece. It's more like he's got SEC experience. He's started in the SEC for 2 years. He's there. And he's a good player too. Ty Washington, on the other hand, is an incoming freshman, and he's been a Creighton commit for like 3 years. And he decommitted from Creighton to, I think their coach left. And, he's this 4-star, some have him as a 5-star point guard that's just busted onto the scenes for next year. And Scoot Henderson is the 2022 point guard that Auburn is, going completely at. And he's a little different style of a point guard that we've seen here at Auburn. He's more of a above the rim. He's 6'3" and freakishly athletic. If there's a guy that you can relate him to that's been in this state recently, it's Colin Sexton.
Oh, pretty good comparison.
But I don't think I don't think that one's as likely. I do think he commits to Auburn, but I don't know about him reclassifying for next year.
I would feel very comfortable if we got a guy like Xavier Pinson, because after bringing in Wendell Green, who doesn't have SEC experience, still got a lot of years to grow with him. I think a little bit of experience would go a long way. Yeah. Do you think if we just say brought in Pinson, do you think Auburn still needs one more guard piece, or do you think they would settle with just those two?
I think we'd be okay, but I think you would feel even better if you got Pinson and Thor and Kessler.
Okay, so, of course you would, because you got all those back. Yeah, if I could have Kessler, if I could have Sharife back, if we're gonna just play, what I want,
I would like to take Anthony Davis and
I'd like
Michael
to have
Jordan.
the entire Final Four team back. I mean. We're just kind of picking and choosing here. Obviously, there's a lot of great options out there for Auburn. A lot of pieces that we don't necessarily need in terms of like they're not like a Walker Kessler. I wouldn't say that we have to have him because we have to have this role filled. You have to have him because of his talent, but not because of a role. But I would say that we're definitely due for one more. I wouldn't be surprised if we came with two more guards. So hopefully you're listening.
It's going to happen right as
it's already happened. Like literally it's happening right now as we stop recording. Yeah. But so hopefully we'll get to talk about that on a next podcast. And I promise folks, we are going to do our season review. It's taking a little bit of time because we knew some of this stuff was going to start dropping. Really the first big domino we needed to know was Sharife Cooper. What was he going to do? So now that has fallen, and with this rumors and news of other things happening, we just wanted to kind of go ahead and get one out ahead of the game, and then we'll break down the entire season as a whole. And there's a lot to talk about, even in a year where we couldn't play in the postseason. So that is our thoughts on everything that's been happening with Sharife Cooper leaving, people coming in, potential people coming in, and then of course weird people going to Tennessee. That is all our let's not start that again. That's all our thoughts on that. Before we get out of here, though, let's share where they can find us on social media. You can find me on Twitter at TigerEye24. Where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Gray Oldenburg or on Instagram at GrayO21.
That's all we have to do in this edition of Inside the Jungle. But until we talk to you again, War Eagle. Before you get out of here, we want to remind you of a couple things. Head over to e2cnetwork.com, our website where you can find everything that you'll ever need from us, podcasts, blogs, and even ways to help support the show. If you want to find individual episodes, you can download all of these on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play. So until we see you again, I want to remind you of one thing, that here at the network, we believe in Auburn and love it. The only question remains, do you?